All right, what's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another day of SaberSim's DFS Office Hours. It is Tuesday, February 8th of 2022. Thanks for tuning into the stream here today. We are amidst NBA trade deadline chaos. Already two pretty significant trades going through today. Sounds like just read a report right before I hopped onto. Don't know how real this is, but it sounds like the Nets are saying that they are holding Harden out intentionally. I don't know exactly what that means. Kind of weird language there. I think every player that gets ruled out of a game in some ways is ruled out intentionally, right? But I think it is definitely at the very least intriguing. So we'll see what happens as we continue to move forward here. We'll go ahead. We'll dive into questions here in just a minute, but I only have two questions in my queue here for today. Two questions that I will probably get through rather quickly. So I would say definitely a good day to go ahead and get your questions into queue. If you've got questions for me, fire them away. We'll hit these two questions in here. We'll chat about whatever else comes through and just go from there. So let's see what happens here. But we'll get the app pulled up and let's get into this here. So first question is, where is it? There it is. From GEN, about the entry editor. Whoops. And, okay, cool. So he said, good evening. By chance, can you go over briefly what the exact match feature does when applying the lineups in the entry editor? I absolutely can. So let's talk about this here. Let me see if I have my entries loaded already. I think I do. Yes, cool. Okay, so let's build something here and do this real quick. So the exact match, what it's basically going to do is it is only going to fill a contest with entries if the number of lineups in that lineup set exactly matches the number of entries in the contest, right? So let me build this real quick. We're just doing a little 4 lineup build here. I don't even care how many lineups are in the pool. Okay, so we have 4 lineups here, right, in this particular set. So we can hop over to the entry editor here. And basically, so first of all, note every single contest is checked, right? All the contests are checkboxed. So we could go over here and basically just say 4 lineups, exact match, and apply. And it's going to say this is only going to fill 1 contest. Would you like to continue? Yes. And you'll see that just this kind of random 25 set contest here filled with that 4 lineup build, right? So if we did this with 1 lineup, it would fill every lineup that we had just a single entry in, right? So that's basically what it does. I think it's probably most useful if you are the type to, if you have a build that you do for your 20 maxes, you have a build that you do for 150 maxes, you have a 3 max build, you have a single entry build, right? Where you're kind of you're going into or creating different lineup sets to fill those specifically, rather than feeling like you need to go through and check every contest you want to fill and then use the rank fill. You could just use the exact match, and you could do it pretty quickly, right? If we had a bunch of different builds, in this case we don't, but if we had a bunch of different builds, we could just like exact match my 150, exact match my 20, exact match my 3 max, and so on. So that's what it does. I think it's probably the least used of the different fill methods, but easy to overlook. And I think for a particular use case, right, basically this exact use case that I've described, I think it's a good little tool to use. So, but cool. Nancy Drew guy said, do you think SaberSim will be adding a usage tab? This question's been kind of coming in pretty frequently recently about usage or fantasy points per minute or different questions here. I haven't, up until this season of NBA, I hadn't heard this come in very often. I think it's an interesting idea. The one thing here is our goal with the data that we present on step 1 or just anywhere on the app has always been to differentiate ourselves, to present data that comes directly from the sims here. So you'll notice like none of this data is historical, right? We have actual scores for fantasy points, but that's it in terms of historical data, right? We want everything else to be directly from our simulations. So I think it's something that we can look at. I can see, I guess, kind of maybe why it would be interesting to look at if you were doing NBA research. I don't think we want to go the route of putting historical data like historical usage or historical fantasy point per minute information on here. But I think the idea of putting it on, maybe the usage rate from the simulations or the fantasy point per minute from the simulations, I think is an interesting idea, something that we can look at, especially how often it's getting asked for. But I don't think it's likely that we're ever going to go the direction of putting historical reference information in the app, just because we specifically, want to stay in this kind of niche of showing data that comes from our simulations. So, but good question there. And then I'm going to jump to this question. This is from Eric. And guys, this is the last question I've got here for today. So, one of our more quiet office hours streams so far. If you have questions for me, have anything you'd like to ask, go ahead and fire them away in the queue now. Get them in there, and we'll answer this question from Eric, and then we'll see what's next, I guess. But Eric said, quick question: what's the best way to quickly upload 150 on DK? The easiest way to do that is using our entry editor tool. That makes it very, very easy. So I will show you how to do this real quick. First, you're going to need 150 lineups to upload, right? So let's build our 150. So we'll do this. Just default settings, not going to make a lot of changes, right? But let's get 150 up first. And then we will go from there. So we'll make two changes to keep the DK gods happy here. So a couple changes to the projections. Save our 150. Okay. And then this is if you haven't seen the entry editor before, this is one of the coolest things about the whole app, right? So you go over to the entries tab. So in my case, I've already uploaded an entries file. In your case, you'll probably see a message that says upload your entries file, and there'll be a link under it that says something like this: download template file from DraftKings. You can just click that. It'll immediately go get your entries file from DraftKings, and then you can just upload that file. And then you'll be on this. Then you'll get to this, basically the same screen that I'm on here. Right? Then all we're going to do is we're going to do fill contest with lineups. We pick our 150. I'm going to click the rank fill method because I just want the 150 into everything here. Click apply. It's going to update everything. Everything's going to have my 150 lineups in there. And then download all entries, download and open DraftKings. It's going to save my entries file automatically for me. And it's going to let me go in here and upload it on the page. So, just like that. All right, cool. Angel says, what is your best advice on today's NBA slate with all the trades going on? It's going to be an insane 20 minutes before lock. Yeah, it's going to be crazy. It certainly is. The next few slates, really, with the trade deadline coming up, I think are all going to be a little crazy. It's tough. I think there's a couple things. So first of all, these are the kind of slates where I'm going to be, I would say, limited in my research I'm doing beforehand, just because how useful is it going to be when news breaks halfway through the slate, right? I keep going back. I know I say this pretty much every time when we're on these streams talking NBA, but it's kind of the main thing that I find that can be a little bit, ineffective about NBA research, or sitting down, to write down your list or whatever of the guys you want to target, because it's so likely, even just on a 10-game slate alone, right? Let's go look at the Basketball Monster dashboard here, right? And I mean, we can just look at the questionable players alone, right? Like, even beyond, this isn't even about just the trade deadline, right? It's a 10-game NBA slate in the middle of February, right? I think this is going to be chaos anyway. So along with the trade risk, right? I don't think it's a slate where it's really worth doing a ton of, research beforehand, because I think it's all going to get thrown out the window. So I would say my approach to tackling this slate tonight is I am going to try to run my lineups with the most up-to-date information as possible, right? So I'm going to wait until I have as much information at lock as possible. I am going to late swap aggressively, right? Probably before every single game starts, depending on how the news breaks out, but likely before every single piece of news comes out. And I am going to, I may try to also create some late swap flexibility. So if we are going into lock, and like especially this Minnesota Sacramento game, right? If we're going into lock and there's still a lot of unknowns surrounding this game, I could see myself potentially bumping up the projections for these teams to get more flexibility for the late games if something comes out. But I mean, Eric said sit out the slate, just play golf. Angel said maybe just play late slate. I mean, I'll say this. I think there's a huge edge on slates like this. Like I have no interest in sitting this slate out. Slates that have a ton of value, right? Ton of value and have a ton of late swap news pending are the slates where I think you can get the biggest edge in NBA because there's less randomness, right? Last night, for example, I think was a very hard slate to play. There were only 5 games, less late swap windows, and not a lot of value at lock. So you're leaving it up to a lot of kind of variance or luck of landing on that right lineup, right? It's easier to make the right decisions on slates where there's a lot of value. And it's also easier to get a bigger edge as the slate goes on slates with more games and more late swap opportunities and late swap windows. So Eric said, if you put in the work, there's still an edge to be had. Yeah, I mean, the work to me tonight is late swapping and making sure that you're going to be around and following up and keeping up with the news. I don't know when the slate looks like this 2 days before the NBA trade deadline. I don't know what the point is of like trying to research games that start 2 hours after lock at lock and trying to figure out what your core plays and your low owned plays. Like, I don't know what all of that is. My approach tonight is going to be very much, probably rolling with default projections, rolling with default sliders, and just late swapping like crazy. I do think we talked about this a little bit yesterday. I do think this is an interesting slate to play with the groups as well, especially, there's going to be certain teams in particular that I think are very, very popular played alongside one another, right? Or I think teams are going to get stacked pretty often. Portland, Brooklyn, depending on how the projections fall with both the Pacers and the Kings too, I think could be popular teams. I think it's interesting, like 2 guys popping on the value thing, Blake Griffin and James Johnson. Interesting. Would have expected maybe a bigger negative correlation there. Not as much as I expected, but I think on a slate like this, on a 10-game slate where correlation is going to have a moderate factor, right? I do think the idea of, keeping an eye on correlations and seeing if there are any logical correlations to build groups against here on the slate tonight, right? Especially amongst some of these top value plays. But there actually aren't very strong negative correlations between these guys. So, but that's something I might look at as well. So, Angel says, can you go over late swap? I'm still getting familiar with that. It is the most important thing you can do in your NBA process, bar none. Everything else you are doing in your NBA process is secondary to making sure you can successfully late swap. And the reason why is because NBA news breaks late and often, right? So you get starting lineups for teams. Late, very close to the start of those individual games, and players get ruled out all the time. It is also very impactful when that happens, right? The player getting ruled out has a significant impact on the projections on the rest of the team in NBA, mostly because it's not an event-based sport, right? And so when we're thinking about, the way a basketball game plays out, if a starter gets ruled out, right, that player's minutes and points and assist rates and rebounding rates kind of has to go somewhere, right? While in NFL, a player's snaps and potentially targets have to go somewhere, and it still has an impact, right? It's not so much, the biggest thing a wide receiver can do out there on the field is generally score a touchdown. And it's not necessarily true that a player's touchdowns need to go somewhere, right? It's not as true in the same way. If Jokic is going to put up, if Jokic is likely to put up somewhere between like 20 and 30 points on the court that night, those points, a big chunk of them are going to go somewhere. His minutes are going to go somewhere. His rebounds are going to go somewhere because they're not just going to, not exist. So anyway, late swap is crucial, right? It is the biggest edge in NBA DFS. So SaberSim makes it very easy. Once the slate locks, right, you can use our swap tools here, right? So in the entry editor, swap, and then this late swap here, right? So you go to late swap, you're going to see a very familiar looking build window. And what this is going to do is it's going to take the number of total unique lineups you have, and it's going to rebuild them based on whatever rules and slider settings and settings you've put in here, right? By locking in the players who are in your lineups whose games have already started, and then rebuilding the best remaining lineup around the remaining players in the lineup with the remaining players left in the pool, right? So Eric says, Saber updates projections based off the news. We do. Often within just a couple minutes sometimes. So if news breaks, we will rerun thousands of simulations play by play for that game, taking into account the new way that game's likely to go based on the news that broke, and then update our projections for it. And then you can rebuild your lineups using these new simulations throughout the slate, right? So if we start the slate and the projections are what they are right now, just for example, and then, even just an hour into the slate, we get news that, maybe most of these Timberwolves are going to be out tonight. So now there's a ton of Timberwolves value. Well, those projections are all going to bump up. You rebuild your lineups, and now you're probably getting a lot more exposure to different Timberwolves value plays. So the main reason it gives such an edge, again, well, I guess there's a couple things. Again, because NBA news is very impactful when it breaks, it changes the projections dramatically, and it happens often. It's a big edge, but I would say the other part to that is that the field doesn't late swap appropriately or often enough at all, right? There's a lot of people that play NBA DFS and just simply don't late swap and don't know it's important. And there's also a lot of people out there that, because of the tools they're using, can't late swap optimally, right? They can't take into account the new correlations between players. They can't take into account the way that the game state is likely to change, or the way that the actual play-by-play cadence of the game is likely to change when a significant player comes off the court, right? Because you're using the simulations with SaberSim, you can take advantage of all that. So very, very powerful, very, very important. So let me know if that helped. I guess maybe I kind of focused a little bit more on strategy there rather than like the practical tutorial side of it. So, we walked through the swap button. You basically, I would say it makes sense generally sticking to about the same settings. And then when you get to the late swap build, you can just click this button, download this, and download your new entries file. So. Cool. What other questions do we have here today? Anything else? Anybody else have any questions here? Quiet day on the stream. Not too many questions. I assume everybody's just eagerly awaiting the NBA trade deadline news. So if you have any other questions, fire it away. We'll go ahead and get to anything else before the end of the stream here. I mentioned yesterday, this is my last stream of the week. I'm taking off on a short little vacation here. So you guys will have Andy and Chris covering for me through the end of the week here. So I think it's a good thing. Always always good to get some fresh faces in here, some fresh voices, some fresh perspectives on the Office Hours stream. So looking forward to that. Chris said late swap on mobile app. It's very similar here. We'll go ahead. Let me do this. We have this thing all mobile optimized. So on mobile, I think the main thing to note here is that you don't actually do this through the app. You don't actually do this through the DraftKings app, for example. You need to use the mobile site on DraftKings. But otherwise, kind of similar look and feel here on mobile. You'll go here, you'll click swap. Actually, you know what? Let me do this real quick. One sec. Let me pull my screen share down. Hang on one sec. One thing I'm also going to add here too, and I'm actually just going to pop this into the YouTube chat because this will help. I've actually done a whole demo of this on my actual phone, and here we'll go ahead. We'll pop it into there. So that's now in the YouTube chat there, a link to the video I recorded for it, but we'll do a quick one here live as well of how this looks on a phone. But one sec here. It takes a second to kind of get this spun up on my end to like to emulate the phone on my end is what I'm trying to do. So all right. Hang on. I might need to use Chrome. Okay, I think we're good. Let's see. Yep. Okay. So let's pull this back up. All right. So this is kind of what it will look like for a phone. Again, it's going to look a little bit different based on the phone that you have, right? But, pretty similar deal here, right? So, again, it won't start with this screen. You'll start with a screen that looks something like this, right? So you can go in here, download template file from DraftKings. It'll download to your phone. Again, this might look different depending on what you're individually using and what your phone settings are. I know for some people, it opens up this file in the browser, and then you have to save it from there. I know for other users, it'll just immediately download to like a files or a download folder or something like that. But then we can go ahead and upload it, right? Select the file. And then go from here. In this particular case, maybe we're filling, right? We can go in here and we can fill our lineups. Very similar look and feel here as it does on desktop. Fill our 150. Download. Same deal here. This is another thing, I guess, on a phone, since we're talking about this, that I have heard sometimes. For some users here, you may need to do the download entries button and then open DraftKings yourself. I know on some phones, I have heard that this download and open DraftKings doesn't actually download and open DraftKings. It just opens DraftKings, I think, or one way or the other. So you may have to do download entries and then open it yourself. But once you've got that up, you're good. And then, late swap, same deal, right? Click late swap. It's going to open up your build settings window here. You can go ahead, go in here, late swap your 150 and go from there. So then again, this will rebuild here and, should be all good to go. So I do this all the time. I'd rather do my late swaps on my computer when I'm around to do it, but there's plenty of slates where, I'm out or something happens and I need to react quickly. I would say, here's what I would recommend. If you haven't done a late swap on your phone before and you're nervous about it or not sure how to do it, the next time you have to late swap and you're just at home, at your computer, everything's normal, try to do it on your phone and just practice it when you're not under the stress of trying to figure it out live on the fly and you're away, right? Because I think once you've done it once, you'll kind of realize how easy it is, and then you'll know how to do it the next time that's the only choice, right? So that's what I would recommend there. But we put a lot of time into making sure that this workflow for the late swap and entry editor was very mobile optimized on this most recent update. So I really think you'll find that it is. So Eric said, where do I get a SaberSim shirt? You can get your hands on one of these gorgeous SaberSim shirts here via our winner's circle. So on our site, up at the top, the winner's circle. All you need to do is you need to use the SaberSim logo as your avatar on DraftKings or FanDuel, and then win a contest, top 5 contest of more than top 5 finish for more than $1,000 in a contest, and then tweet at us at SaberSim with a screenshot, and we'll send you a shirt. We'll give you some free SaberSim, all kinds of stuff. So. Christopher asks a good question here. When you run lines on the cash settings, does that make it then run like a traditional optimizer, just jamming the average highest projected points and salary into the lineup, or does it still reuse a range of outcomes? It is the former. So when you use the cash settings, first of all, the cash settings actually use a different version of the builder that takes longer to specifically find the highest projected optimal. But cash along with sim variance 0 is just going to use the average projections, right? and optimize for the top overall projected lineups. So yes, doing something like this, or I think the default will look like this. Whoops. Typically, right? This will kind of brute force the highest projected optimal lineups, just like a traditional optimizer. Eric said, I use SaberSim through a partner. Am I still able to use the mobile? Yep. Should work just the same. Same deal there. What else? What else do we have here today? Let me check Slack. Okay, so it looks like a question here from one of the another partner question here. So this one, difficult for me to kind of show you here, but question says, when I pulled up the app today, I noticed the button on the homepage to switch from Run Pure and SaberSim's projections. Is there a way to switch between the two? So this is, again, specific for those of you that have SaberSim via Run Pure. But when you do, and provided, or really any of our partners, right, Simplify or DFS Karma or Full Time Fantasy, you'll have an option right here next to the search box to change your source. It'll say source, and you can choose either the partner projections, the SaberSim projections, or an average between the two. You will only have that option to choose once the partner has uploaded their own projections for that day. So if it's early in the day, sometimes you won't have that option there. But and then AP said, is the mobile app available in the Canadian App Store? We don't actually have a mobile app listed in the app stores. The mobile version of the app in the browser is fully optimized for a mobile view. So if you just, you open up app.sabersim.com in your mobile web browser, view it on a smaller device screen, and it'll kind of naturally adjust to that mobile view. But there is no iOS or Android app at the moment. We've had it requested of us before. At the moment, it's just kind of a low priority thing because we think the in-browser version just works very well, especially on a mobile device. So that's what we've got right now. But KG said, Jordan, you taking a few days off. What will you be doing? I am doing a little snowboarding vacation. So looking forward to it, getting out. We've been getting blasted with snow recently, so looking forward to it. But all right, what else we got, guys? This has kind of been a fun stream here. I'm basically just answering these questions as they come in live here, which I know is probably a bit refreshing because, there's a lot of these days here where I have got 45 minutes of a queue of questions in front of me right when we start the stream. And then the questions that are coming in live, I don't get to it till like 45 minutes or an hour into the stream. So kind of fun to just tackle these like as I'm seeing them live coming in here. But we're right at about the half-hour mark. So, give it a couple minutes to see if anybody has any other questions coming in here. But otherwise, might think about wrapping this one up early. Again, if you missed the start of the stream, a couple things to look forward to. You'll have Andy and Chris hosting office hours the rest of the week. So you'll get to hear from those guys, which should be fun. And then coming soon, a office hours dedicated to talking about the new groups tool. So I did a quick demo of this yesterday. If you missed it and want to watch this, it is up. It is the first segment of our office hours yesterday, right? But we have a new groups functionality here. So add group rule. You can go in here, set some rules here and say, don't give me, I don't know, Jokic and Aaron Gordon together. If you feel so inclined, right? Can do all kinds of stuff with this. So I did a little demo yesterday on this. If you want to watch that, go check it out. But we will have a longer office hours dedicated purely to talking about groups here in the next couple weeks. So looking forward to that here. Let's see, a few other questions coming in. Chris said, yeah, when I click download DK template trying to late swap, it just opens DK and has the spinning wheel. Interesting. I'm not sure. I would say I'm not sure if you mean the spinning wheels on SaberSim or DraftKings. This sounds like maybe something for our support team, though. So if you want to either email us, support@sabersim.com, or pop a message into the support channel on Slack, and the support guys should be able to help you out from there. I won't be able to do too much detailed troubleshooting on this individual case here on stream here. But Hungry Baby said, when playing multiple cash games, should I be running the same lineup for all of them? Yeah, I would say 90% of the time. It just makes sense. It just makes sense. There's no reason to sacrifice projected points to differentiate, right? The biggest edge in lineup construction in cash games, barring a couple exceptions with late swap flexibility and maybe ownership, it generally just makes sense to play the highest projected lineup possible. Sacrificing projection to differentiate generally doesn't really make a lot of sense. Now, the natural exception to that is if there is, a couple lineups that are very similar to one another, maybe off by one player or the other, right? I have heard sometimes, from maybe more risk-averse cash game players that they'll split up and play two cash game lineups that are projected very similarly that just have like one player different or something like that. I've never done that, even when I've been playing more cash games. I think the biggest way to differentiate yourself when you're playing cash, right? So, or to diversify, I guess is the better way to say it. The best way to be diversified playing cash games is by your opponents. So by playing, a lot of head-to-heads against a wide range of different opponents, you're going to naturally diversify that lineup because it's playing against a different head-to-head opponent in each lineup, so that you kind of get that spread of outcomes. You're not all in. You're not as all in on the lineup as it might seem if the majority of your cash game contest selection is head-to-heads, which is what I recommend. So otherwise, if you were playing just double ups and 50-50s and you said, well, I don't want to go down all on one lineup. While that does make some sense, each lineup you play after the first is theoretically going to be worse than the second, right? Because you're sacrificing average projections to play 10 different cash game lineups. So in GPPs, right, lineups with very different, there's a couple things at play. First of all, we're less concerned about average projection and we're more concerned with expected value. Expected value is more difficult to calculate in GPPs, and the lineups with a wide range of average projections can have similar expected value. So it makes more sense to be diversified because, you can theoretically play 150 profitable lineups or 150 lineups that have a similar expected value all into one contest that are all unique lineups. Whereas you almost certainly couldn't play 150 unique lineups that were all good cash game lineups into the same contest. So anyway, I think I've made my point there. But Jaybird says, do you have a percent to raise or lower player projections if you like or dislike a player? Seems like you use 10% on the one you like. What about the ones you dislike? I like that 10% either way, So like, let's say you were running your test build and you were like, holy crap, that's a lot of Justice Winslow, which is probably what's going to happen, right? Well, you want to drop his projection by a little bit, 2 or 3 points here, depending on kind of what feels right. I would probably start with like 2 and just see. That's not going to have a huge impact, right? You can come down a little bit more. I like 10% because I think it will let you have an impact without really throwing away the sims, right? I think 10%, put it another way, I think 10% is kind of within the error range for any of these player projections and will let you have a lot of control over the process, but kind of keep you on the right track, right? If you came down and said, no, I'm going to drop them by 10 points, right? I mean, you are just flatly disagreeing with the sims at that point, which again is fine. Maybe you have an insight into the Blazers rotation and it's actually really sharp, that change, but it's significant and it is flat out disagreeing with the sims. The main reason I like the 10% and I recommend people use the 10% when they're making adjustments to projections, especially just getting started, is because I think it's a good way to add value, to make adjustments in a way that has an impact, but still kind of keeps you in line with the general approach of how the sims think the game is going to flow. So, but Andrew, I actually covered this question yesterday about your stack rules. It should be in the timestamp. So all the past office hours videos have like a timestamp chapter list in the descriptions. So your question about the stack rules here, the short answer to that was, I would say I would not run the stack. I would not use your stacking rule in your test build because I think test builds should be, as unrestricted as possible because you're using it for research. You're using it purely to get an idea of how the slate looks. So I think you're better off not using stacking rules there to the stack rule, even maybe even if it's just a minor stacking rule, it's still going to have an impact on the way the builder builds lineups. And then your research you might get out of that is a little bit is almost impure at that point. So Edward asks a good question here and says, on the new group tool, let me get this up. On the new group tool, can you have different groups for different types of contests? So you can save your groups and then load them in. So like, let's say, okay, so let's say, for example, you have in GPPs, you have a core, right? So let's say you've kind of done some research on the slate and your GPP core is Winslow and James Johnson, and I'm just kind of picking guys out, and Goga and Dwayne Washington, right? This is your GPP core, right? So you want at least 2 players from this core in every lineup, right? So you could edit this and call this GPP core, right? So we'll call that GPP core. And then let's say, in a different contest type, for example, right? Maybe you have, maybe your cash games core is, maybe you do your cash games a little bit differently, right? So let's say, for cash games, your core is this. And the logic of the rule is different. Maybe for cash games, you say cash core. For maybe for cash games, you say you want all 4 of them, right? And you just want to see what the available lineups are around it, right? So we'll go ahead and do that. And then we can save this. Okay, so I already saved that one, and then save the cash core, right? So we'll do a new one. So this is a GPP build, right? So in this case, we can just trash the cash core, right? Remove it. So we would build this, we would go through, we'd build our lineups, right? Now we want to do a GPP, or we want to do our cash build. So now we can come over here, delete the GPP core, but load the cash core. Whoops, not like that. So now this will show up. And we could actually even, tomorrow, if you're playing the slate tomorrow, right, you're going to have a totally different core, but maybe if the logic is the same, right, maybe the way you play cash games, again, I'm just making stuff up as I go here. Maybe the way you play cash games is you always lock in your 4 guys that you've researched that night and build the best possible lineup around it. You could come in here tomorrow and reload your cash core, right? And what it's going to say then is it'll say, do you want to, here, let me show you. Let's go to the night slate. So pretend the night slate is tomorrow's slate, right? So now you're going to come in here and you're building your cash games. And you load your cash core rule. It's going to say, what do you want to do with players in this group that aren't on this slate? And for this kind of rule, maybe you just ignore the group and keep the logic and now add the new players to this group, right? So yeah, you can essentially save groups for virtually whatever you want and load them as it makes sense for you. So, but good question. Jaybird says, answer my question perfectly because I have overdone lowering in the past. Yeah, I would say, stick to those 10% bumps. And I think the other thing that's nice about 10% is, like, I said this yesterday too. We had a similar question. So let's say you ran your test build and you felt like that you were getting too much Justice Winslow. So you went in here and let's even actually do like a proper 10%. So let's lower him by, 2.9 would be roughly about 26 exactly. So something like that, right? Now, if you run the build again, you're probably still going to get a lot of Justice Winslow. And so what that's saying to you is that, his projection is actually pretty anti-fragile, right? Even if his actual real mean projection is 90% of what we think it is, he's still a good play, right? And in some ways, I think that can be helpful to say, this is probably just a good play, no matter what. Like, even if you're getting a lot of him, right? You can reduce your exposure from a risk tolerance standpoint if you want to be less exposed, but he's clearly a good play and his projection is pretty anti-fragile. Now, if let's say here's a good example, right? On a pay up option like Jokic, right? Let's say, what's probably going to happen tonight is because there's so much value. I think you're going to find that there's a lot of builds where you just get a lot of Jokic because he's expensive. It's very easy to get to him tonight. And he's the highest raw fantasy point projection you can pack into a single position spot on your lineup. So you're probably going to get a lot of him, right? And maybe you look at this and say that projection feels a little bit high, or I'm getting too much of him, right? If we drop Jokic 10%, right? That's probably going to have a pretty significant impact on his exposure in your lineups, right? This could be potentially getting, being overweight to completely a full fade of Jokic, which says that his projection is actually pretty fragile, right? So I think that's one of the things that's nice about the 10% is that instead of brute forcing your way in and saying less of this guy, more of this guy, and adjusting the projections until you get that, you can instead say, I think I'm getting a lot of this player, or I'm getting not enough of this player, and I'm going to bump him and then kind of respond. I'm going to work with what the sim gives me from there, right? If I think I'm getting too much of a player and I drop his projection by 10%, I'm still getting a lot of that player. I'm just going to play him. If I'm getting a lot of a player, or if I'm not getting a lot of a player and I bump his projection by 10% and I'm still not getting a lot of that player, it means that player not only has to hit their mean projection, they have to, even if they hit 110% of their mean projection, they still aren't that viable, right? That's why I love that 10% number. I think it's just a great starting point. So, where do you get the My Projection tab adjacent to the SaberSim Projection tab? The SaberSim Projection tab will not let me make adjustments in the player pool. Yeah, so if you click this Edit Table Columns button over here, you can change the way your individual table looks like, right? What probably happened is that your My Projection column got disabled here. We have a bug where columns can disappear or change their order on their own. I think the easiest thing to do is to just go over here. If you're having issues, click Clear All and then click Reset to Defaults and then Apply, and it should just put everything back to the default order of the columns. So, but good question. Larson says, what is the best sport for cash games? And then said, is there an edge with golf still? Best sport for cash games, I would say, is almost certainly NFL, just because it's like the softest overall sport. There's going to be a lot of players that, are out there building NFL cash game lineups without even really consulting projections at all, right? Just building lineups that kind of feel right. They're just incredibly soft contests. I think NBA, there can be a little bit of an edge in cash still, just because, players are pretty normally distributed. There's a little bit lower variance overall. There's not a lot of players that are going to take full advantage of late swap. I think contest selection in cash games is huge. So if you're going to play cash, you should be really dialed into contest selection. Stick to low dollar head-to-heads, playing as many different opponents as you can. If you're going to play 50-50s or double up, play single entry 50-50s and double ups with the highest number of entrants as possible, right? The more entrants there are in a 50-50, the softer the field is going to be overall, or the double up. And then, play the highest projected lineups possible, build yourself in a little late swap flexibility when you can, and late swap aggressively for NBA at least. For NFL, I think it's a lot about, just playing the highest projected lineup possible. Is there an edge with golf still? I would not play golf cash games personally. I think salaries are too efficient. And I think the sport is too high variance to really make golf cash profitable. I also think whoever's out there playing golf cash, I don't think there's going to be a soft enough player pool to really make it worthwhile, right? At least not with anything below an enormous bankroll, right? In regarding golf in general, I think golf is a lower edge sport, but I think there is an edge there, right? Just talking about, I think there's a lot of times people say, why do I say there's no edge in golf? Or why do I say there's a limited edge in golf? Let me say it that way, right? I think there's a couple of reasons. First of all, we have essentially no real correlative factors. So, a huge edge we get in sports that are higher correlation is that people don't stack enough, right? We don't have that in golf. Sometimes you get weather correlation, but generally you don't. Second, player salaries in general are set roughly in line with the opening Vegas odds for tournaments. And those opening Vegas odds are generally pretty sharp, right? They are beatable, right? I think there are profitable golf bettors out there, but they're relatively pretty sharp, which means there's not a lot of times situations where there is a spectacularly well projected golfer relative to the price, right? And if there is, even with SaberSim's model, right? Even if you're finding that there's a golfer that projects exceptionally well relative to their price, what it probably means is that golfer's true projection actually would be a little bit more halfway in between what the salary implies and what their projection is, right? And then third, because, ownership of golfers in general kind of tends to follow those salary bands, right? There aren't often enormous ownership mistakes made by the field when it comes down to golf. So I think the biggest edges that you're going to find in golf overall are those ownership inefficiencies, right? People that aren't actually taking into account how variant the sport is and over-owning golfers that project marginally better than others, I think is your biggest edge. But you've got to remember, if you're playing on DraftKings or FanDuel, you're trying to beat a 16% rake to be profitable, right? So it's not enough to be better than average. You have to be better than average and beat 16% rake. And I think it is difficult in golf sometimes to find that edge. There are specific golf tournaments where I think there is an undeniable edge. The first is the majors. During the majors, the golf tournaments are so huge. They compare with NFL Sunday sized tournaments. The field becomes so soft that despite the fact that there is a much lower raw probability of winning a contest like that because of how many lineups are in the pool, those are far more beatable contests for the majors. So I like playing the majors. I think tournaments where there is either a weather correlation factor, which gives you an additional edge, or a reason maybe where ownership is getting particularly out of hand, I think there can be an edge there. And then finally, seeking out contests where you can play a lower rake, right? That reduces the need that on your end to gain a larger and larger edge. Yahoo has been running a $5 1,000 person contest with no rake every single tournament of the year so far. I've played it every week. It's a small tournament, so if you want to come compete with me and I know Kelvin Dubs and Epic Problem, I see those SaberSim logos in there all the time. So if you want to come compete, I think it's a great contest to play because your requirement to be profitable in that contest is to just be better than average rather than to be better than average and beat a 16% rate. So, but I also, with that said, I will probably just end up playing every single golf tournament of the year, at least until fall. I typically play January to the start of football season ish, just because I like the sweat so much. And I think building the lineups and kind of trying to solve the problem is fun, but I play a little bit lower bankroll in golf. And my expectations are a little bit lower just because I think golf is a tough sport to beat. But it's also DraftKings says it's their fastest growing DFS sport as well. So, who knows? We'll see what happens. The more and more people that kind of join it and play more and more, the softer it's going to get because there can't be that many skilled golf DFS players out there. So I think one of the good things that golf has going for it is that it's DFS in a lot of ways is the kind of primary way that fantasy golf is played, right? You have one and done pools, I think, is the other kind of big competition. And I think a lot of people that are passionate about golf and sports betting in general like to do some just outright or future or matchup golf betting. But, something like fantasy football, right, is probably still the predominant way that seasonal fantasy football leagues is probably still the predominant way that fantasy football is played. It feels to me like golf DFS is the primary way to play fantasy golf, right? Does that make sense? So I see why it's growing, but I think it's still tough to win. But okay, let's see. Edward has another question here. And he said, when you adjust player projections and a new projection comes in from SaberSim, what happens to the projection that I put in earlier? Follow-up, is there a way for me to see which players have updated? Good question. So we will, short answer pretty much, we will never overwrite a custom projection, ever. We will not do that because we don't want somebody to put in a bunch of time to update all their projections and then we just replace them all or change them all because we ran a new sim for the game. So we'll never, if you change Jokic's projection, right? Even if we run a sim later and his new average projection becomes 70 points for some reason, we will still never overwrite your my projection here. At the moment, there is not a very easy way to see when individual team or player projections have changed. On the app, we do have this last updated tab here, which will show, when any projections have changed. If you want to see when particular sims have run for a game that your players are playing in, the easiest thing to do would be to join Slack. Actually, this question came in through Slack, so you're already in Slack, would be to keep an eye on the NBA lineup alerts channel and see when sims are running. That's my best advice there. I would say the other thing is be careful with making a ton of projection changes early in the day because we're going to be running sims as news breaks and starting lineups comes out anyway. So I would say, if you can, try to pick your spots for the projection updates, right? And keep an eye on those particular teams as news is breaking throughout the afternoon or throughout the evening, I guess. So. Cool. What else? What else we got? Any other questions for me here? Approaching that hour mark. So we pulled a pretty good stream together here today. Thank you, everybody. Joining, watching, asking questions. Any other questions here for me today? We'll go ahead. We'll probably start to think about wrapping this one up, but leave it open for a couple minutes here. Sure, somebody's furiously typing their question out in YouTube chat, hoping that I don't turn the stream off before they get it in. If, of course, a question pops into your head here in a few minutes after the stream goes off for today, no worries. You guys will have Andy and Chris hosting office hours through the end of the week here, answering any questions you have. So don't sweat it, but I don't see any other questions. Oh, we have. All right. Raul said, if a player's projection percentiles, if a player projection percentiles below 20 points add up to 10%, does that mean he has a 10% chance of hitting less than that? Okay. I assume what you're looking at here is like the range of outcomes, right? So you could say something like for Jokic, right? Approximately 40 points, right? Everything below this, 5, that's 8%. That's 9%. That's 10%. Yes, that is saying Jokic has roughly a 10% chance to score 40 or less points, right? If you're looking at the range of outcomes. The percentiles are like explicit, right? So when Jokic's 25th percentile is 50 points, that means he has a 25% chance of scoring less than 50 points. 75% of his outcomes are 50 points or more. That's what they mean. So it can be very useful too, to look at, I think if you're looking at value plays or maybe high owned plays, right? You can kind of differentiate between these different plays. So like, for example, Justice Winslow, right? He is 3K. 75% of the time, he's going to score 22.5 points or more. If he scores 22.5 points, that is still over a 7x output for Justice Winslow, right? It's very easy to see how easily he reaches his output. Now look at somebody like LeBron, right? Now, 25% of the time, looking at the percentiles, right? He scores 42.5 points or less, right? Now, 42.5 points for LeBron would be about 4x, right? That probably doesn't pay off his salary. And you can see, at least for NBA, I would say you can kind of see these trends pretty consistently, that value chalk ends up being generally good and pay up chalk or expensive chalk ends up kind of, being less good, at least in theory, right? The LeBron kind of has to do more or is a little bit less likely to hit a outcome that kind of pays off his salary and his ownership. Whereas, Justice Winslow has to do very little to get there. So, Clay said, can I cap all my core plays to 70%? Yeah, it kind of depends on how you, like, there's a few different ways to do that. I guess, okay, so like one thing you could do, if you wanted to cap all players to 70%, right? I assume that you do, right? If these are your cores, if you're capping your cores to 70, I assume that you want to cap everybody to 70. The easiest way to do that would be to just put this max exposure in here and say 70. And in that case, you won't have 70% exposure to anybody, more than 70% exposure to anybody. Another option would be to go in here and identify, the exact plays that were your cores, right? So whoever your cores are, and just set the maximum exposure to those guys as 70%, right? Maybe your core is Jokic and I don't know, Justice Winslow, go through and do it like this. You could also do it on step 3, right? If your cores are well projected, which I would hope they are, you're probably going to get a ton of exposure to them anyway. So you could come over here to a build that you ran and, for example, let's, do this selectively here. And just do this. So a couple different options depending on how you want to handle it. But good question. Anything else? What other questions we have here? I think we'll go ahead. We'll wrap it up there. Thank you again to everybody that tuned in, asked questions, participated. Thank you to everybody that watches this show after on the recording on YouTube. Again, I will be back here on Monday of next week, 2 p.m. Eastern, but you'll have Andy and Chris hosting office hours throughout the end of the week. Same time, same place. So look forward to that. Good luck in the NBA trade deadline chaos slates that we'll be getting over the next couple days here. And until next week, I will see y'all then. See ya.